Actually, this is our second part of our shir on Rav Moshe Feinstein's Teshuva on Mechitzos. It's in Or Chaim in Siman Lamed Tes. And we discussed last time, I believe it's in Chelek Aleph, Siman Lamed Tes. We discussed last time that Rav Moshe holds that a Mechitzah in a Shul to separate between men and women is a din da'oraisa, and he proved that from the Gemara in Sukkah and the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Sukkah was talked about the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and the Gemara says that there were three stages before the takana, then the first takana, and then the second takana. Before the takana, they had the women in the Ezras Nashim, which we said is not specifically just for women, but we had the women were in the inside or towards the inside, and the men were on the outside. It doesn't exactly say in the Brisa in Sukkah where that was, but presumably they were in they were further back, and the men were further. The women were further in, and the men were further back. Then they said that was a problem of kalas rosh. It led to lightheadedness or frivolity. And then they said, okay, we're going to make the women put the women behind and the men in the front. And Rav Moshe said that they actually made some sort of mechitzah there, some sort of barrier, even though it wasn't a full-fledged wall, but it was some sort of demarcation. And they said it still wasn't good enough. And then they said we have to put the women in the balcony and the men below. And the Gemara asked in Sukkah that how could you add to the Beis HaMikdash? There's a principle called Hakol B'Chsav, which means that anything that was supposed to be in the architecture of the Beis HaMikdash was given to through prophets, given through David HaMelech, it was Nasan HaNavi and Gad HaChozeh, and you can't add to the architecture of the Beis HaMikdash. So whatever the reason was that they did this, very nice, they were worried about Kalas Rosh, but you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to change the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. And actually, if you're learning Daf Yomi, it came up in the Daf last week by adding to the Mizbeach. So, and the pishpishin and the doors and stuff like that. So the Gemara answers that they found the pasuk in Zechariah that said that in the future times there will be some great hesped. Actually, it was the content of my shir last night about Rav Kook's hesped on Herzl. It's the same psukim where it says there's going to be this great hesped, and the Gemara says it's really Mashiach ben Yosef, that Rav Kook, without naming Herzl by name, but he said that he was the footsteps of or maybe could be considered the footsteps of the Mashiach ben Yosef. And there's going to be this great hesped, and the pasuk in Zechariah says that they were separate, men and women were separate. So Rav Moshe says it must be that pasuk is not the source, but rather it's the indicator of a pre-existing halacha that must be a din da'oraisa that was already in existence when the Beis HaMikdash was created, and therefore it didn't have to be given through a Navi, because it was almost as if the halacha was already understood. It's like you wouldn't have to tell David HaMelech, by the way, don't eat chazer in the Beis HaMikdash. Obviously you don't do that. So this is a pre-existing halacha. It has to be a din da'oraisa, because if it was a rabbinic enactment, it would be in violation of the principle of Hakol B'Chsav. So it must have been a din da'oraisa, and therefore Mechitzah has a din da'oraisa.
Doesn't that mean that the Beis HaMikdash was built incorrectly at the beginning?
No, just human beings are the variable there. So it didn't occur, this issue of Kalas Rosh, and then they saw it was occurring, but the concept of Kalas Rosh, meaning the concept was there, but the application had not yet come to being. I agree. It's a very complicated thing to go to. Yes,
because what we're saying is that you can't. It wasn't. It was supposed to be that way from the beginning, right?
It was supposed to be a scenario that doesn't lead to Kalas Rosh, and they didn't know what that actually would look like. Just like they didn't know how big the Mizbeach was, right? So, but it has to be a biblical. That's Rav Moshe trying to stake out in 1946. He was asked about this idea, which is, and Eitan Mason was here last time. He was saying like it doesn't appear anywhere in the Gemara, anywhere in Shulchan Aruch, or like this is the source. And I said, you're right. It is a very radical position he's taking, but he had a proof also from the Gemara in Chulin, which we don't have to go through again. But basically, he's trying to argue against the opinion that says it's a rabbinic enactment in that Gemara in Sukkah, because otherwise the Gemara wouldn't be answering its own question. How could you add to the base of Mikdash? Oh yeah, we found this pasuk in Zechariah. It's a rabbinic enactment. Rabbinic enactments come. They're important. We follow them. We listen to the rabbis, but it's an innovation. It's an innovation that happens at a certain point in history. And there cannot be innovation when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. Then we saw the Maharsha. We're not going to get into the whole story. You were going to say something, David?
No.
So that was last week. So now we're going to do part 2. Ve'ein lomar. It's on page Tzadi Ches, about 6 lines down. Ve'ein lomar sha'isr haya midin yichud. Maybe you'll say, well, there's an opinion that yichud, seclusion with a woman who is prohibited to you, is an isser daraisa, shuma daraisa. Shema yichones ish lifnim. Maybe the man is going to go over the side into the inside, and that would come to a situation of yichud. So maybe that's what you'll say. He says, don't say that. For many, he has many problems with this. Chada, first of all, D'imkein ibchaha the Rav Kahana b'kedusha daf pei aleph. This is against Rav Kahana in the Gemara in Kedushin pei aleph. Sheyoser adiv nashim mibefnim va'anashim mibachus. Because according to Rav Kahana, it's better to have the women on the inside and the men on the outside. Now he doesn't explain anything. I looked up the Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara in Kedushin is very simple, but we're going to have to keep it, the Gemara in Kedushin and the Gemara in Sukkah, in our mind. So I'll just try to summarize it for you. The Gemara in Kedushin says that Rav Kahana holds that men on the outside and women on the inside, in a situation of, let's say, a home or some sort of living, they're sleeping. There's some sort of arrangement where there's a woman's room and a man's room. So Rav Kahana says, if the men on the outside and the women are on the inside, no problem. Ein chosheshim mishum yichud. Presumably because if one of the men who are on the outside is going to go on the inside, the other men will see. So there'll be some sort of social pressure not to do that. However, if the men are on the inside and the women are on the outside, then the man could say, "Oh, I need to use the washroom, or I need to go out, I need to take care of something," and they won't. He has no excuse. Whereas he has no excuse if they're on the inside, but on the outside, he could potentially pretend he's going somewhere else. When in fact he's joining the women on the outside. I guess they're kind of like the room was maybe like a circle. There was like an inner chamber and an outer chamber. So that's Rav Kahana. So the Gemara then continues and says that there was a brisa, just to make matters a little more complicated. There was a brisa that said the opposite. It was actually that if the men were on the outside and the women on the inside, that was a problem. But if the women were on the outside and the men were on the inside, then that was okay. And why was that? Because presumably, if the women were on the inside, then if the women were on the inside, then maybe like a man could venture inside without being seen from the outside. Whereas if they were on the outside, then men were going in and out all the time, so they wouldn't be spotted. And then the Gemara says that Abaye says, well, now that we have this brisa that records it differently, and we have Rav Kahana's position, we're going to be stringent on both scenarios. And that's why he puts up some sort of some wall, rows of pitchers, and Rava puts up a row of reeds in between. So therefore, he says we're machmir, we're stringent. We have to have a barrier both directions, whether the women are in the outer chamber or if the women are in the inner chamber. So what's the problem that Rav Moshe is pointing out? If you tell me that the Gemara in Sukkah is saying the problem is that it will come to some sort of issue of yichud, well then the Gemara is actually against Rav Kahana, because if you recall, we said that we started off before there was any takana. We said in the Gemara in Sukkah, in the Beis HaMikdash, we started off with a scenario where the women were on the inside and men were on the outside, and we said, no, you got to flip it around. Well, that doesn't make sense, because according to Rav Kahana, that's superior. It's better that the women be on the inside and the men on the outside. So then he said that's one problem. Sorry, he says that men on the inside and women on the outside is a problem, and seemingly so he says if the men are on the inside and the women are on the outside, so we have a problem. But the Gemara in Sukkah says if the women are on the outside and the men are on the inside, then we don't have a problem. It's more ideal. That's number one problem. Then he says the Gam lo kibraisa de tana ibcha v'nema shabraisa dekan he hamasnisa de b'kedushin. He says, and you also can't tell me that the brisa that says it's the opposite is going like the Gemara in Sukkah, because the ha brisa the hasa matir anashim mibefnim v'nashim mibachutz v'hacha oser l'maskana b'travayu. So the brisa over there said if men are on the inside and the women are on the outside, that's okay. But we said that wasn't okay. We said that you have to put up the gallery and put the women on the top. And then he says, "V'gam ein shayach l'miflag al ma'aser Rav." It also doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, what did we say over here? According to Rav Kahana, and according to the Brisa, we said whether we're going to say women on the inside, men on the outside, whatever it is, this position is against the Gemara in Sukkah, because the conclusion of the Gemara in Sukkah was it's not good enough. You have to have the women in a gallery. So this Gemara in Kiddushin comes out, whichever one's preferable, men on the inside or on the outside, whichever one's better for whatever Sfaros. This Gemara comes out more lenient than the historical story of the Gemara in Sukkah. So you can't tell me that the two Gemaras are both dealing with the problem of a potential seclusion. That's sort of just in the Shakavatari and the Gemara. But he says, even I have more problems than that. Another reason that the Gemara in Sukkah is not dealing with a problem of Yichud. V'gam ben nashim harbe. During the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, right? When you have a large gathering with everyone coming to the Beis HaMikdash, you have lots and lots of women. Men and women. Ein lachush liyichud bein l'Ram and bein l'Rashi. There's a difference of opinion in the poskim. If a man is secluded with multiple women, is that a problem? According to the Rambam, it is a problem. According to Rashi, it's not a problem. Tosfos and the Rambam say that it is an issue, and Rashi says it's not. Without getting into the sugya and kiddushin, so he says, but if there's many, many women in this scenario in the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, that it will not be a problem whichever sheet you go like. Why? So the Rambam she'oser af im nashim harbe, the Rambam who says you cannot be secluded with many women, eino oser mitzad shema yifrosh. He's not worried about maybe there'll be a seclusion. Eladavka bepiresh. Only when there actually is seclusion. The Rambam says if you are actually secluded with multiple women, that's a problem. But in the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, there's no seclusion going on. It would only be maybe you'll pull someone off to the side or you'll go into a side room. But there's not an active seclusion going on, so the Rambam wouldn't be stringent with this. And again, it has to be a din d'oraisa. Ayin be that's the Rambam in Perichaf Beis Me Isure Bia Halacha Ches Ula Rashi. And according to Rashi, She'oser Shema Yifrosh. According to Rashi, who says that we are worried. You're not just worried about active seclusion, but potential seclusion. He says Ha'ino Oser in Harbe Nashim. The Rashi's lenient if there's multiple women, and that's in fact what the Shulchan Aruch. He says, look at the Shulchan Aruch. Fine. So number one, it doesn't fit with the Shakavatariya, the Gemara and Kiddushin and Sukkah, and then number two, it doesn't make sense with the problem of Yichud because you're in a place there's many multiple women. And even more than that, Shalom hayashayach yichud klal. It's not people ask this question. How could I go into Times Square? I don't know if you ever heard anyone ask this question, but it's something that I've heard. How could you go into Times Square? It's yichud. Well, how is it yichud? Because there's a concept that the only time you could have, the reason why multiple men are preventative of yichud is because I'll make sure David doesn't mess around, and David will make sure that Lesher doesn't mess around. But if everyone in Times Square is not going to bat an eye if something goes on in the middle of the, whatever, in the bar or in the street or anything, nobody cares. So then they're all called prutzim and halacha, and therefore it's a isir of yichud. Why is that a mistake? it's not a case of yichud in a public area. Seclusion is seclusion. You can't have seclusion in Times Square. So that's what he says over here. There's no.
You can't know what's going on.
Yeah, right, exactly. Meaning
Public,
there has to
you
be a
can see.
private area. It's not necessarily correct. There could be things going on there that are not so kosher yosher, but in terms of halacha, we have a definition of what seclusion is. Seclusion is you're in a private place that is secluded. You're not in a public space. And he says the same thing over here. You can't say that we're worried about a chashash yichud by the Simchas Pesach Shuvah. It's not a situation of yichud. It's a public area. So he says, Lo shaykh yichud klal hasam de beis hamakomos hoy psuchim v'hochin derech sham in the Azara and the Ezras Nashim and in the chel and the area right going that the men and the women wore. It's obviously not a situation of yichud because people are going in and out the whole time. Hochin derech sham b'cholis. El michutz laharabayis.
It's a different inyan. It's a question of whether it's appropriate or not.
Right.
Right? Like,
exactly.
I don't think many Rosh Yeshiva will say, go to Times Square. Like,
That's a different problem.
For different issues.
Yes.
For different reasons, but not
I'm not
for yichud.
advocating to go to Times Square. I'm just saying it's not an
It's
Isser
not yichud.
Yichud.
It's
If
not
it would be an Isser Yichud, it would be Mamish also to go there.
Right.
Then you're right, a sensitivity or knowing yourself. You know, if you know that you have a crazy gambling addiction, you don't go into Las Vegas and just try to be Kovis Yitzro. But yeah, listen, if you have a reason to be in Times Square, I mean, I've been there. Maybe I'm incriminating myself, but it's not like, yes, okay, there's some things that are not so great, but like you go, if you're taking the subway, you're going through Times Square, it's like, that's where the bus stop was whenever I went to Passaic. That's, if you want to get from Midtown to Passaic, so there's like a jitney, there's you could take the I-90 inside of Port Authority. I think it's called the 190. Wow, it's been a long time. The I-95 is the highway. The 190 is the bus, but like that was more expensive. So I always took this is probably wrong to say. They called it the Spanish bus, but maybe it's more politically correct to call it the jitney or whatever. So there was a bus stop right there in right outside Port Authority. It's right smack in the middle. It's like one block down from Times Square. So I've been there many times. So why is it mutter to go there? I'm not saying that it's necessarily the right thing to go there. It's not a destination. It shouldn't be a destination. Let's put it that way. But okay, listen. I remember one time we were in 8th grade, and we were going for an 8th grade graduation trip. Okay, listen, you're gonna get a kick out of this. So we had our Rebbeim, and it was like a modern Orthodox community school. Then Passaic became like this massive, huge town. But when I was growing up, it was a small town. So it was maybe kind of like an Eitz Chaim type of school. I don't know. But the Rabbeim were all more like yeshivish. They came from Muncie and different places. So we had an 8th grade graduation trip, and I don't know what they were thinking, but they brought us to not Times Square, but like we were going bowling in Manhattan. It was like, we're gonna bring the boys. So we get into the bowling alley, and there's it's playing on the even back then it was I'm not so old, I'm 33, but it was in the, let's see, 2000, maybe 2000. Trying to figure out how old I was. No, 2005, something like that. Maybe 2005. Well, I was in 3rd grade, I think, when the World Trade Center happened. Either way, it was like 2000 something. Like it's probably much worse now. But we get into the bowling alley. It's just like us 20 boys with this Rebbe, maybe like a parent chaperone, and the things that are being shown on the flat screens right in front of the you're bowling and you watch. It was definitely not okay. So the Rebbe gets in there. He says, "Let's go, boys!" We turned right around. We left.
Las Vegas, the
So-
whole culture is what's there.
In the airport.
No, but the whole point.
Yeah,
I'm saying,
it's
in Las
crazy.
Vegas, it's like yichud in the entire city. It's like the.
So that's to be the
culture
question. The culture is
in Vegas
fruits.
stays in
Vegas.
Right. So that's the question. So the answer halachically, not hashkafically. I guess hashkafically you have to ask, why are you there? I mean, apparently there's a whole from community now or it is already, but it's expanding in Las Vegas. So I'm not posting that type of particular personal shiloh, but I'm just saying that halachically there's no isser of yichud. There could be other problems, but yichud it's not, and that's what he says here in the Beis Hamikdash. When you have the chel and the heichal, you have to remember the Beis Hamikdash. Mirz Hashem, we should see it. Bekarov. It was a busy place. It was like a minion factory. Ki'ilu. Like there's people bringing their karbanis. There's like sheep. There's blood flying everywhere. There's kohanim. There's oh, you have a chatas. Okay, chatas over here. Okay, bring this over here. Like you just imagine it's just craziness. So there's people going all over the place the whole time. So it's not a makom yichud. So he rejects this completely. He says it's not because of that, and it is, as David pointed out, the issue is kalus rosh. Now, he's going to have he's going to have to try to make this argument that somehow this kalus rosh concern is an isser daraisa, which is going to be hard to really. And you're also going to have to argue that you only need it on certain occasions and not other times, because in the Beis Hamikdash, you didn't have a gallery, a women's gallery, the rest of the year. Only on Sukkot, on the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So, but we'll have to get there. So that's what he says. He rejects the position that the Gemara in Sukkot is talking about an Isser Yichud. Fine. V'lachin, Sarach Lomar, you have to say, She'isserhu Rag Mishum Kalas Rosh. It's only an issue of Kalas Rosh, of lightheadedness. V'chashu mitchila Shema Sheba'u Lidei Kalas Rosh Haya Machmas Sha'anashim Hutzruchu L'Ros Dafka Derech Anashim. The issue of Kalas Rosh was because the men had to look. They were looking at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. They were looking at the Gemara in Sukkah talks about the rabbis who would, it seems like there was people who would do the cartwheels, and they were doing fire tricks and different stuff. Like obviously they were not just learning the Beis Medrash all day long. Even the Talmidei Chacham had things that they got excited about and did different things and whatever flips and tricks. So they were wanting to look at that and watch that. And the women, they were in the back, and the women were in the front, so they had to look in that direction. So that became a problem. And then he says, okay. The issue of actually looking wasn't the real issue. They knew, like Eddie was pointing out, they knew this was going to be a situation. You're going to see a woman, if the men are in the back and they're looking towards the front, they'll actually see the women. So that Rav Moshe says that's not really what the problem was. The problem was, as he'll try to argue, Kalas Rosh is more like mingling and interacting, as opposed to Histakos is just seeing. Then he says, V'lachein, just skipping a little down, Hetiru kishalo yadu shiyavu lidi kalos rosh. They allowed the men to be in the back and the women in the front because they didn't think it would necessarily lead to kalos rosh. They didn't think about necessarily this happening, so they had to see it. Once they saw it, then they said, okay, we have to change things up. It was becoming a social scene. And they were actually touching with their hands. And then they saw that, and then they said, and then they said the women have to be from the back and the men in the front. Because then there's not a requirement to look at them, which led to mingling and touching. And you see that even in the Beis Hamikdash, right? It's like human nature is not any different. I mean, maybe it's a little different today, but it's people were people, and they had to deal with that. So the rabbi said, okay, we got to put the men in the front and the women in the back. How does that solve it? They're still going to maybe mingle, but at least they thought at that point it's not going to require the men to look towards the women. That would sort of stop the mingling. And they saw that didn't work either. Since there was, he argued earlier, last week we talked about this, there was a mechitza, but it kind of had in the gates and they had windows and ways to look in, so it didn't really stop them. Therefore it came, it came mitzad ha'anashim, the women actually, like it's not just a man problem here. We're not talking about just the men watching the women. It just became like a social scene, and it became, he said talking and touching, and that was the issue. And then they came and said the final takana, which was putting the women in the gallery. My mother-in-law loves the gallery because she could actually see everything, and it's not like sometimes you have a mechitza and like it's dark, she can't hear the rabbi, she can't see what's happening, so my mother-in-law is a big fan of the gallery.
Also pick out the unmarried men.
Without the talis
Unless there's fard, right?
or yeki, right?
But you wouldn't want them anyway.
To be
in an ashki.
I understand. We're just tongue in cheek, but so Fine. Shiro derech hanoshim, so that's what it causes the kalas rosh, and therefore they said you have to have a real the women in the gallery or a mechitza gemura, which is like a real wall, in order to really maintain the havdalas anashim v'nashim that was to separate. And mikol makom linyan havdalas anashim v'nashim eino klum shadayin heim kemuravim u'bayin l'dei kalas rosh. So he says, even though, generally speaking, when it comes to all halacha, mechitza is a real mechitza. In other words, it's a halachic mechitza. But he says we're not dealing with making a rishus hayachid, or we're not dealing with making a kosher sukkah. He said, I read sort of half the sentence. The whole sentence is, he says, Av shilakol davar hatzarach mechitza harehu mechitza gemura. When it comes to things that need a wall, like halachic concepts, a wall is a wall. It's 10 tefachim high, and it's a wall. It's a halachic wall. So, it's like, why can't we say, loved? What you do with a sukkah, you have a little gap. You could close that gap. So, and you could really just have a little bit like a wall up there. And so he said, Rabbi Moshe says it's not dealing with halachically the same result that you need when it comes to a mechitza. You could have a mechitza halachically mechitza, but come to kalas rosh, because if I have a mechitza 10 tefachim high, is like probably, I don't know, like this high. That's not going to stop us from, talking or mingling. So that's why he says they had to make a gezutra, which is what the Mishnah in Midos calls it, a gallery. Shayu hanashim ilmalav hanashim lamata. The women are above and the men were below. Shrak az inam kemu ravim. Then they're not really going to be intermingled, and that's the main concern: intermingling. Shalo yihu mu ravim. V'chein psak Rambam, and that's what the Rambam writes in Beis Bechira, Parakeh Halacha Tes Alma Shebetchila Af Shahayu Muvdalin Bidin Mechitza. Originally, he said there was a mechitza and they were separated, but he said that's not good enough. They said they still need to be in the gallery to prevent intermingling. So now, how's he going to explain that this is only for shul? Because we spoke of this a little bit. It was an unpublished letter that Moshe wrote. Rabbi Karapkin quoted it a few Shavuos ago. Where that at a simcha and a bar mitzvah, he was asked, "Do you need to have I think it was a wedding or a bar mitzvah? I don't remember. Do you need a mechitza?" He said, "No. Especially if there's a kapeda on one of the sides, you don't need a mechitza." Okay, a kapeda, like a certain side feels very strongly. Seemed to imply that one side really wanted there not to be a mechitza. So they wrote to Rav Moshe and they asked him, "Do you need a mechitza?" I'm sorry, I'm speaking fast. I just realized that I want to try to get through it, but I should slow down. And Rav Moshe was asked, at a family simcha, do you need a mechitza? And he says no. So now Rav Moshe is going to have to explain why. Two things. Number one, you only need a mechitza during the simchas beis hashoeva. So why not the rest of the year in the Beis Hamikdash? And two, why is this only for shul? In a Beis Ovel, you don't need a mechitza. You don't need a mechitza. Well, depends if you go where you go. But I'm pretty sure Sobi's. You don't need mechitza to go into. Why is this a shul thing?
You know where the question really came up during COVID, when we had the backyard minyan.
Oh yeah.
Temple minyan.
Oh yeah, interesting. Did anyone write a tshuva about that?
I can tell you about the Rav Gershon Dykov, the great prophet
Yes,
of Stone Hill.
you said it does not require mechitza.
It does not require
I remember
mechitza.
you told me this like when I first came. You were talking about this a long time ago.
So we had family tents basically
the
without
garshad.
walls. Without walls, but so like each family, well, on one side, the other side had a mechitza, but one side we had like
Well,
4
they had
tents.
mechitzas for the non-vaccinated,
Well,
the
no.
vaccinated.
So we kind of had like
We used different backyards.
not family, but household, even not with our kids.
Oh, they also
Just-
they had that.
just so we
What's
had-
it called? Bubbles, whatever it's
Yeah,
called.
just so we
We have
had
a PTSD
separate
if we talk about
tents
this too much.
with the covering, but without walls.
Yeah. So it becomes clear that this is the way Klal Yisrael is nohig, the way that we behave, the way that we're practicing our mechitza halacha in the Orthodox world, is it's only for shul. Minimally, I'm not saying that you can't find anywhere that has a mechitza for whatever. I mean, I've been to places where they have mechitzas in the street, but that's not, not what Moshe is advocating. It's a
You know
it's
what
not-
they,
It's also only during tefillah.
only during tefillah, right?
walking
Right.
around
Shul,
Tehillim.
tefillah during shul.
when we were in Morocco, and we went to the graves of the great rabbis.
Yeah.
A few places where
Had
they had like
mechitzos?
an ohel, they had a mechitza, they had a drape that
drape.
basically that you can pull
Could also
across.
make people feel more comfortable, and it also maybe has a din of a shul because
Right, because
I was in Kever Rachel and they have like a shul there, like a kollel.
This was the grave, like
Yeah, you're saying like it
the
was not a
cemetery.
shul,
They got to
Well,
the
not
point
a
not a
shul.
shul. So maybe it's just be to make people feel comfortable. What'd you say, Eddie?
They're buried separate even.
I mean, everyone's buried separate.
I think
You're saying they also some cemeteries the rows,
Yes,
the
there is.
men
I've
row, the
heard.
women's
I'm
row.
not an
Yeah,
expert.
yeah, some places have that.
Might need some extension.
I think
Right,
the
exactly.
modern Sephardi
Right.
are a lot more
Well, I
strict
think
about
about
it
it.
than the modern Ashkenazi Orthodox. The
About the
Sephardi,
burial plots, or you're talking about the
so
mechitzos?
generally the mechitza. I mean, in the place
Yeah.
like Kol Torah, when they have a kiddush,
Yeah.
separate kiddush.
Interesting.
Women and men separate.
Growing up, I was in a Baal Tshuva shul. That's what I felt it was. Maybe that's not the rabbi wanted it to seem, but it was about. There was no talking and davening at all. Nothing, because it was like the rabbi, the people who were there were all they all wanted to be there. They it was like a different culture. The rabbi, like he's amazing, Rabbi Eisenman. He had them in the palm of his hand. He like if there was talking for like. I remember he worked on it. It wasn't like overnight, but he developed it. If there was talking, it would just like stop the davening, talk about it all the time.
Great.
And then he also said, so this Kiddush thing. So at some point, I remember they changed it. They said, we're now going to have separate men and women on different sides. And people were like, okay. Like, they were open to the idea of taking on more.
Just
Which
out
was
of
a-
curiosity, when,
So I grew up with a different context of this whole thing.
when you're talking about Rav Moshe saying a family simcha,
Yeah.
does he mean literally a family simcha, as in, I'll
No,
have a family wedding,
no. Yeah,
and I'll invite
yeah.
friends?
Sorry, I didn't mean that. No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he's not talking about that here. I should maybe just clarify. He is not talking about simchas and shiurim and things like that. I have separate information. I think it's even on my notes that there's a letter that he wrote, unpublished letter that somehow people have. Rabbi Karapkin gave it to me, I think. I don't have it here actually with me. But he allows for simchas. So how is he going to get through these two hurdles? He's going to argue, number one, again, why on the simchas b'Beis Shoeva only you need a mechitza, and then number two, why is it only for shul? So here he goes. What comes out from this whole discussion is that shuls, synagogues, that are gathering places of men and women to daven, Tov Yoser Lasos Gezutra Shanashim Yulamayla. It's better they have a gallery than to have a mechitza. But he says, in me'eza tam kasha, but if it's, for whatever reason, it's difficult, lasos gezutra, tzrichim lasos mechitza mamish, gezo shetimonim milavel lidikalas rosh. He says, if you can't do a gallery, you need to do a mechitza, which is a real mechitza that will prevent kalas rosh. V'lo sagi b'mash nechshava mechitza l'chol davar. It's not going to be enough for what a mechitza would be for other things, right? Could go in b'sha'arim pesuchim, like having the sort of doors or openings. So we saw it didn't work in the base of Mikdash at all. It's not enough we have 10 cubits from the ground, even though that would be halachically a wall in other contexts. It's not going to prevent anything to do with mingling. It will cause people to be able to talk, and it will cause them to be. They will be having a 10 cubits high wall will not stop the mingling. Okay, fine. He says, well, how high does it have to be, Rabbi? You just said it's not enough for 10 tefachim. It's got to be more. So how much? So he says, I think, in my humble opinion, it should be up to the shoulders. Up to whose shoulders? Okay? The average person's shoulders. Stockless. It's not because of the prohibition of looking. You can see each other. The main thing is to prevent them from mingling. Oh, so Shazeh Hariyudo Gam Mitchil. They knew they would see each other. They never prohibited seeing them. It was an issue of the intermingling that resulted from seeing. It doesn't mention after they made the great takana, this final step in the Beis Hamikdash. It didn't say they had any like walls or beams or barriers. It just said they were in the gallery. It just says Stam Gezutra. And it appears that they could technically see the women. Now he has a problem, because the Rambam in Perusha Mishnayos says something different than what he says in Mishnah Torah. The Rambam in Perusha Mishnayos says the reason for the takana of putting up the Gezutra of the gallery was so that the men do not look at the women. So that's a problem, because Moshe is saying you don't need to have a mechitza to stop them from seeing. Putting up to the shoulders is enough. So
he's saying put it up to the shoulders, but it's not an issue of seeing.
Yes, you could see each other's faces, but he feels that's enough to prevent comfortable intermingling. So that's what he says. I think he says.
Think that somebody's going to climb over a waist high.
Yeah. Listen,
like it sounds like it's up to the shoulder.
Yeah,
is more than just preventing mingling.
Right. I guess.
If you do Shalat Tefillah, the mechitza is about 5 feet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
To the shoulder length.
To the shoulder length.
Yeah.
No, obviously, I mean, listen, this is
that's
what
the
he says,
advertising
but I'm just
person.
kind of questioning if he's saying that it has.
I hear what you're
only
saying.
has
I
to
hear
do
what you're
with
saying.
their
He does say
intermingling.
it's sort of his assessment.
head.
Doesn't really say he has much of a proof. But his main thing is that the issue is not to see, the issue is to mingle. So if the issue is mingling, you're right. You could suggest that better to have it even higher. But you said, or maybe you're saying
I'm
at
saying
least
you
lower.
don't need it that high.
You don't need it that high.
If the purpose is,
Right.
unless he's trying to strike a middle ground,
It seems like he's trying to do that a
saying
little bit. Yeah, a little bit. It seems like
where
that.
he's kind of saying
It's not
intermingling,
super.
but okay,
Right.
Make it
I
right.
hear what you're saying. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm just seeing that it's late, and this is already second part here. So maybe we'll skip a little bit ahead. But the main question here he has is, and the goal is to make them 9 o'clock Marv. Just if anyone wants to do that, don't worry. That's where I'm headed as well. So his main problem is he has a stira in the Rambam, because the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos says the reason for the Gezutra was to prevent them from seeing. But his main thing is it's not about preventing from seeing. You could see. You could look up at the gallery and see women. So without getting into the details, he suggests kind of a... He says that maybe he has this like fancy explanation of how we can try to make them work together, but he's not super confident in that explanation. So therefore he says, just skipping down to the bottom of the paragraph on page Tzadi Tes, V'af im nistapik. V'am im nistapik b'kavanaso b'pirusho. He says, and even if you're a little bit you're not sure exactly what the Rambam means in his explanation in the Pirush Mishnayos, you're not going to buy and get into it with you, but he has this fancy footwork explanation of how he fits together with the Rambam in Mishnah Torah. He says, Ladino, when it comes to halacha, this is important klal, by the way, in learning halacha in the Rambam. Ein lanu ela ma shekosav harambam behilchosav. Parakeh bechira halacha tes. I think this is what he means. I'm not 100% sure, but I think what he means is if you have a contradiction, this happens all the time. You have Rambams in Mor Nevuchim, Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos, Rambam in Mishnah Torah. What do you go with? So presumably it's one person. So I don't know the answer to that exactly, but in terms of halacha, we follow the Mishnah Torah. He says the Pirush Mishnayos is a Pirush on the Mishnayos. But he says in terms of halacha, the authoritative work is the Mishnah Torah.
Are there a lot of stiras in his works generally?
I mean, that's how every good brisker Torah begins with the stira in the Rambam. But usually it's the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah itself.
Right.
But you're saying, are there many stiras in the different places? I think there are. I think that's part of what Mark Herman is dealing with, a lot of these, the different drafts of the Mishnah Torah and Sefer Mitzvos, and he crosses things out and he goes back, and so he was definitely aware of trying to be consistent, but yeah, this is an important cloud just on a practical level. What do we do? So he says you just have to follow the Rambam in Mishnah Torah. That's what we do, and therefore it's Kadesh Lo Yu Me'uravim, that we don't want them to be mingled, and that's the main concern. Let's go to the top of the next column. V'lachein b'mechitza. V'lachein b'mechitza gavoad achar kisefayim. If you have a wall which is at least up to the shoulder length, shemistavish shein level dedikas rosh yesh lahatir. V'hu gavoa gimel amos. Now he comes out with an actual shear. It's 3 amos, which is yud ches tefachim, 18 tefachim, which is not so high. It's really not so high. It's probably approximately 5 feet, something like that. And he proves it from a few Gemaras. So I'd have to look these Gemaras up. I admit I did not look these Gemaras up, but this may answer your question, Eddie. Why did he pick this kind of random? It's not random. He has 2 Gemaras that he wants to show that these Gemaras show that this is a good shear. Okay, you're going to see the head. You'll see each other's heads. Lo yavul midei kalas rosh. You won't need to kalas rosh. For those who want to be stringent and do it a little higher, good. You have a bracha. You have a blessing. It's nice. It's a nice thing if you want to do it. It's not required. Ubefrad, and specifically, Shahar be Nashim be Medina Zu. Many women in this country, talking in the United States of America in 1946, Einon Nizheres Bekisei Harosh. They want to be more stringent. Why? Because many women in this community didn't cover their hair. By the way, many well-known Rosh Yeshiva, their wives didn't cover their hair. It was also true in Europe as well. So he says people wanted to be more stringent. They don't want to be seeing women who didn't cover their hair. But avaladina yesh lahatir. He says, but you could be mekel. It's not required. So I think he is trying to take this middle approach where he's coming out really strong. Got to have a mechitza, but he's trying to be as lenient as he can with the actual size of the mechitza. And then he gets into this question of how can you make a bracha in front of women who are married with their hair uncovered? It's a problem. It's an erva. So he says that this is a very well-known, important Aruch HaShulchan to know. The Aruch HaShulchan writes, and he says, many were like him. I think it means followed his practice. Mutar lehisbalel kenegdon. You're allowed to pray in front of a woman whose hair is uncovered. Why? He doesn't even quote why. But I remember, this is a long time ago, I looked this up many years ago. I believe the Aruch HaShulchan says you can close your eyes. You can close your eyes, look away, it's not a problem. Even though you'll find posting that say it's a problem, but Rav Moshe is endorsing this position that it's not an issue to daven in front of women who don't have their hair covered. V'tzarech limchos, v'lachein ein limchos, do not protest. Al v'pachos miyudches tefachim aser v'tzarech limchos. If a place has a mechitza that's lower than yudches tefachim, lower than, I don't know what it is, 4.5, 5 feet, whatever it is, you should protest as much as you can, with full force. And then Ramosha almost like gives it away. He says, and even if you want to say it's only Asher Midarabanan, what? You just told us this whole time is Asher Midaraisa. So he's admitting that even if you want to take a position against me, which means there must have been people who took that position, he says, still, it's a problem. You still need to protest, and certainly, according to my opinion, where I hold it's an Issur Daraisa, like I've proven before, you have to protest. Then he deals with the question, what about the fact that it's only, maybe people will say it's only in the Beis HaMikdash that they had this. Don't, Rabbi, our shul is very special, it's very nice, it's a Mikdash Ma'at, it's a miniature Beis HaMikdash, but it's not a real Beis HaMikdash. So he says, no, there's a concept of Kalas Rosh even outside the Beis HaMikdash. It's not a Beis HaMikdash thing per se. It was a gathering issue. That gathering could have been elsewhere. And he brings a proof from that hesped we mentioned before, the one that we quoted in the Zionism Shir on Rav Kook, that he gave this hesped for Herzl and mentioned this pasuk. So the hesped in Zechariah was not in the Beis HaMikdash. So the pasuk that it says that the women and the men were separate was on a hesped And you'll say, well, we didn't say you need to have a mechitza for a hesped. We only said davening in shul. So this is where he has to sort of thread the needle. He says, it's not the issue of the place. It's not the Beis Hamikdash, because then you're limited to the Beis Hamikdash. It's rather the gathering that is needed. It's required gathering. That's what he wants to say over here. This is the key line. If we want to just, because I want to make sure that we get this key line in. This is the punchline. If you it's kedai for just this line, he says, or this few lines. Therefore, he says, b'chol makom kibbutz, in any place of gathering that's a required gathering, sharei hesped Lamedim Misham, the hesped that we learn in the future, this eulogy that will happen in the future, we learn from there, Lo matzanu bo shiyah b'mikdash. It wasn't in the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore you can't say it's a Beis Hamikdash proper issue. And then he says, Alamash mashu iser b'chol makom shetzrichin lehikabetz bo anashim v'nashim, any place where it is a required gathering of men and women, she'asur lios below havdalah mechitzas beinehem kedei shelo yavu leikalas rosh. So, a shul, davening in a shul, it's not the fact that it's a shul. It's the fact that it's a communal required gathering. You don't have to go to a shiva house. Yeah, it's a mitzvah to go. It's a good thing to go. But you don't have to go. You don't have to go to someone's wedding. Not everyone's invited. A shul, minyan, is where everyone is gathered and is invited. Everyone has, it's a communal required gathering. That's when you have to have a mechitza. And that's his conclusion. So because Teshuva was a communal gathering. Now you could say, well, did you have to go? It's Aliyah L'Regel, so you should go, but you don't have to go every year. I was thinking about that question.
How about Hakel?
Right, Hakel was everybody, but it was only every 7 years.
Was there a Mechitzos or not?
What?
Was there a Mechitzos or no?
Presumably there was.
The other 6 years, no.
But maybe...
I understand.
Right, that's the question. But once they built that gallery, so then presumably they would use it during during Sukkot, because Simchas Pesach Rev was during Sukkot, and Hakel was also Sukkot.
So would that be the difference between having a mechitza in a shul, davening, versus having a mechitza in
Shir?
shul? Somebody
Correct.
gives a shir.
Correct. And he does say that he brings a proof that you don't need a mechitza in the Beis Hamikdash generally, because Chana, what happens? The story of Chana, where we learn Shemona Esrei from, she goes into the Beis Hamikdash and she's praying quietly, close enough to Eli that he could hear her. If there was a mechitza or a women's gallery, he wouldn't have any idea she was davening quietly. That's the whole thing. He thinks she's drunk. She's praying quietly. She really wants to have a child. And Eli says, "What are you doing?" And he mistakenly thought she was drunk, and so he says clearly there was no women's section then. It was the Beis Hamikdash. So obviously it's not about the Beis Hamikdash, it's not about the place per se, but it's about a required gathering. And he wants to say a place like the Simchas Beis HaShueva, which he's learning that it was a required gathering. I don't know, it's an interesting question. What was I guess it says you had to be there to see the Simcha. If you didn't see the Simcha like that, you never saw Simcha in your life. But he says that was a required gathering. So I guess it's not necessarily the Chiyuv Tefillah that is the requirement. It's any time there's a communal gathering. He says that in the future time when there'll be this hesped, Mashiach ben Yosef dies, whatever this case was, everyone would be there. You'd have to have a mechitza, because whenever it's a communal required gathering where everyone is there, therefore you have to have a mechitza. And to finish off, the fikla gam bebati kinasir shalanu in our shul shemiskapsim leispal tzarach shidei mechitza v'davka mechitza kezo shal yovu mitocho ledechalas rosh. Therefore you have to have a mechitza, not just a halachic mechitza, but a mechitza that prevents from kalas rosh, because that's the din d'oraisa. And he says that the shear is 18 tfachim, which is 3 amos tall, or he says a gallery, which he likes better, the gallery. And he signs it, Moshe Feinstein, 1946. So it's an very interesting window into the times. First of all, you saw most women did not cover their hair in the United States. He mentions that. Just interesting that he says we follow the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, right? When we don't have a way to decide between the Mishnah Torah and Pirush Mishnayos, if we have a contradiction, and he seemingly admits that there's another view that's rabbinic, but he says even if you're going to take that approach, you should still really, really try to get to the Yud Ches Tfachim. And I think Eddie's correct. He's trying to reach that middle ground where he's trying to push really hard for one piece of it, which is the Mechitza itself, but try to be as lenient as he can. Again, maybe I'm reading into it too much, but he is trying to say you don't need it to be past the shoulders. Okay, hold it here for tonight. Thank you everyone for coming.